I've worked private security for 10 years. I've guarded malls, construction sites, and even a few high-end gated communities. Usually, the job is 90% boredom and 10% telling teenagers to get off the property. But back in 2018, I took a contract at a facility I'm going to call Blackwood Behavioral Health. I won't use the real name for legal reasons, but if you live in the Pacific Northwest, you probably know the place. It sits on a hill, surrounded by pines that seem to block out the moonlight. It wasn't an abandoned place, not fully. The facility was undergoing a massive renovation. The East Wing was active, housing about 50 patients, mostly minimum security. But the West Wing and the notorious Ward C were condemned, waiting for the asbestos abatement crew to come in and gut them. My job was technically simple: patrol the perimeter and do an internal walkthrough of the empty wings once every 2 hours to make sure no urban explorers or copper thieves had broken in. The first 3 weeks were uneventful. The place was creepy, sure. It smelled like a mixture of industrial bleach and old, wet rot. The silence in Ward C was heavy. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a pressure, like the air itself was thicker, pressing against your eardrums. But I'm a big guy, 6'2", and I don't scare easily. Or at least I didn't. It started on a Tuesday around 3:00 a.m. I was doing my rounds in Ward C. This section of the building had been closed since the late 80s. The tiles were peeling up like dead skin, and the ceiling had water stains that looked like Rorschach tests. I was walking down the main corridor, my flashlight beam cutting through the dust motes dancing in the air. My boots crunched on broken glass and plaster. I reached the nurse's station at the center of the ward. It was a glass-enclosed booth, covered in grime. I stopped to log my time on the little clipboard we kept there. That's when I heard it. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was rhythmic, slow. It sounded like metal being dragged across concrete. I froze, my pen hovering over the paper. The sound was coming from down the hall, past the nurse's station, deep in the corridor where the high-risk isolation rooms used to be. "Security," I called out. My voice sounded pathetic, swallowed instantly by the damp darkness. "If anyone is in here, you are trespassing. Come out now." The scraping stopped. I waited, 10 seconds, 20. Nothing but the settling of the building. I convinced myself it was just a rat or maybe a pipe expanding in the cold walls. Old buildings make noise, everyone knows that. I finished my log, turned around, and walked back to the active wing, walking a little faster than usual. The next night, Wednesday, I dreaded the 3:00 a.m. round. I tried to swap shifts with my partner Dave, but he had the flu. So, armed with my heavy maglite and a radio that barely got reception in the concrete bowels of the building, I went back to Ward C. This time, the atmosphere felt different. You know that feeling when you walk into a room where two people have just been arguing? The air felt electric, charged with hostility. I walked past the nurse's station. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was louder this time, and closer. I shone my light down the hall. "I'm calling the police," I yelled, bluffing. "Come out." Silence. I'm not the type to run from a noise. If there was a squatter in here, they could be dangerous, and it was my job to clear them out. I unclipped the pepper spray from my belt and moved forward. The beam of my light swept across the doors. Room 301, Room 302, Room 303. The doors in this hallway were heavy steel with small, reinforced observation windows. Most of them were slightly ajar, rusted open. But the door to room 308 was closed. The scraping had come from that direction. I approached room 308 slowly. The little slide window on the door was shut. I put my ear against the cold metal. I heard breathing. It wasn't the shallow, frightened breathing of a kid caught trespassing. It was deep, wet, rattling breaths. It sounded like someone with fluid in their lungs. "Open the door," I commanded, banging the steel with my flashlight. The breathing stopped. Then a voice. It was barely a whisper, dry and cracking like dead leaves rubbing together. "Not yet." A chill went down my spine that felt like someone had poured ice water into my shirt. "This is private property," I stammered. I reached for the handle. It was locked. I fumbled for my master key ring. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped the keys twice. By the time I got the right key into the lock, the silence on the other side was deafening. I turned the bolt, kicked the door open, and flooded the room with light. It was empty. I mean completely empty. No bed frame, no chair, no trash. Just 4 bare concrete walls and a single barred window that was painted black. There was nowhere to hide. No closet, no bathroom. I stood there for a full minute, spinning in circles, checking the ceiling, checking the floor. I was losing my mind. I had heard the voice. I had heard the breathing. I checked the dust on the floor. That was the clincher. The floor was covered in a thick gray layer of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. There were no footprints. None. If someone had been in there, they would have left tracks. I left Ward C running. I didn't care about the logbook. I sat in the security office of the active wing until sunrise, staring at the monitors, jumpy as hell. I told myself I imagined it. Sleep deprivation, right? The mind plays tricks. Thursday night, my last shift of the week, I told myself I would just do a quick sweep. Walk in, shine the light, walk out. I entered Ward C at 3:15 a.m. I didn't hear scraping this time. I heard humming. It was a lullaby, a low, off-key humming of Rockabye Baby, and it was coming from room 308. I should have turned around. I should have radioed the cops, but curiosity is a curse. I walked down that hall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The door to room 308 was closed again. I knew I had left it open the night before. I didn't knock this time. I didn't yell. I crept up to the door and slid the little observation port open. I looked inside. The room wasn't empty anymore. In the center of the room, illuminated by a slice of moonlight coming through a scratch in the blacked-out window, was a man. He was facing away from me. He was tall, impossibly thin, wearing a hospital gown that looked ragged and gray. He was standing in the corner facing the wall, and he was scratching the concrete with his fingernails. Scrape, scrape, scrape. His fingernails were long, curled, and black. The wall was covered in scratch marks, deep grooves worn into the stone. As I watched, paralyzed, he stopped scratching. He didn't turn his body. He just tilted his head back, further back than a human neck should go. He tilted it until he was looking at the ceiling, and then he slowly rotated his head toward the door. His eyes were gone, just black, empty sockets, but his mouth was stretched into a wide, wet grin that showed too many teeth. He whispered, loud enough for me to hear through the steel, "Is it time yet?" I didn't scream. I couldn't. I slammed the viewport shut and backed away. Then the door handle began to turn. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it. I watched the brass handle slowly rotate downward. The metal groaned. I turned and ran. I sprinted past the nurse's station, past the peeling tiles, slipping on the debris. Behind me, I heard the heavy steel door of room 308 creak open. Then I heard footsteps, not shoes, bare feet slapping against the concrete. Slap, 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 fast, much faster than I was running. I burst through the double doors connecting Ward C to the renovation zone and slammed them shut, jamming my baton through the handles to bar it. I collapsed on the other side, gasping for air. Bam! Something hit the doors from the other side with the force of a truck. The glass in the small windows shattered, raining down on me. Bam! I scrambled backward, fumbling for my radio. "Breach! Ward C, send backup!" I screamed. Then, through the broken window of the door, a hand reached through. It was pale, skeletal, with those long, curled black nails. It groped blindly for the baton I had jammed in the handles. I didn't wait. I ran all the way to the main lobby of the active wing. I told the night nurse to call the police, that there was a violent intruder. When the cops arrived, 4 of them, guns drawn, we went back to the doors. The baton was still there, bent almost in half from the force. We opened the doors and went into Ward C. Room 308 was empty, but this time there were footprints in the dust. Barefoot prints. They started at the center of the room, went to the door, and followed the path down the hall to where I had blocked the exit. But here is the part that made me quit that very morning. The police tracked the footprints. They went back into room 308. They went to the corner where I saw the man standing. The footprints stopped at the wall. We looked closely at the wall. There was a small ventilation grate near the floor, maybe 6 inches by 10 inches. Tiny, too small for a child, let alone a grown man. The screws on the grate were loose. One of the officers shined his light into the vent. He recoiled, gagging. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. They found a nest in there. Rags, stolen food wrappers, and a pile of fingernail clippings. But the vent tunnel went deep into the foundation of the building. They never found the man. They did a headcount of the active wing. Everyone was accounted for. They checked the records for discharged patients. Nothing matched the description. But I know what I saw. And I know that the renovations in Ward C were stopped a week later because the workers refused to go in. Sometimes late at night when I'm trying to sleep, I can still hear that sound, scrape, scrape, and I wonder where he went. Because if he could fit through a 6-inch vent, he could get in anywhere. I believe that art is the only way to truly speak when your mind has locked the doors to your voice. That's why I became an art therapist. I wanted to help people. I was 24, fresh out of grad school, and naive enough to think that empathy was a shield that could protect me from anything. I took a job at St. Jude's Center for Behavioral Health. It wasn't a prison-like asylum. It was a modern, low-rise facility nestled in the suburbs. It had manicured lawns, big windows, and a terrifyingly high suicide rate. My favorite patient, if you're allowed to have favorites, was a man named Arthur. Arthur was in his 50s, a former architect who had suffered a catastrophic breakdown. He hadn't spoken a single word in 3 years. He was diagnosed with severe catatonic schizophrenia. He spent his days sitting in the communal room, staring at the wall. But when you put a piece of charcoal in his hand, he woke up. He was a genius artist. His sketches were hyper-realistic. He would draw the other patients, the nurses, the birds outside the window. The detail was photographic. You could count the threads on a sweater in his drawings. The incident happened in November. It was a miserable Tuesday, raining hard enough that the drops sounded like gravel hitting the roof. The facility was short-staffed due to a flu outbreak, so I volunteered to stay late and supervise an extended open studio session for the low-risk ward. By 7:00 p.m., it was just me and Arthur in the art room. The art room was my sanctuary. It was a large space at the back of the building with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the garden. At night, though, those windows just turned into black mirrors reflecting the fluorescent lights of the room. Arthur was working on a new piece. He had a large sheet of A2 paper taped to his easel. He was using a stick of compressed charcoal, his hand moving with frantic, jerky motions. Usually his movements were fluid, graceful. Tonight he looked tense. His shoulders were hunched up to his ears. I sat at my desk in the corner, catching up on some paperwork, sipping lukewarm coffee. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the scratch of the charcoal and the drumming rain. After about 20 minutes, the scratching stopped. I looked up. "Everything okay, Arthur?" He didn't turn. He just stood there staring at his paper. Then he ripped the sheet off the easel, crumpled it up, and threw it on the floor. This was new. Arthur treated his art like scripture. He never destroyed it. He grabbed a fresh sheet, taped it up, and started again, harder this time. The charcoal snapped. He grabbed another piece without slowing down. He was breathing heavily through his nose, a low whistling sound. I stood up and walked over to him, keeping a respectful distance. "Arthur, you seem frustrated. Do you want to take a break?" He ignored me. His hand was a blur of black dust. I decided to let him work it out. Catharsis, right? That's the point of the therapy. I went back to my desk, but I couldn't focus. The energy in the room had shifted. It felt heavy, like the air pressure had dropped before a tornado. 10 minutes later, he stopped again. He stepped back from the easel, dropping the charcoal. His hands were black with soot. He was trembling. I walked over to see what he had created. When I looked at the drawing, my stomach dropped. It was a drawing of the art room. It was perfect, of course. The perspective was flawless. He had drawn the tables, the cabinets full of paint, the clock on the wall showing the exact time, 7:42 p.m. He had drawn me, sitting at my desk. The detail was unsettling. He had even captured the tired slump of my posture and the specific logo on my coffee cup. But the perspective was wrong. Arthur was standing at his easel in the middle of the room, but the drawing was done from a high angle, looking down at us. It was drawn as if the viewer was floating up in the corner of the ceiling, near the ventilation duct. "This is amazing, Arthur," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But why this angle? It's very creative." Arthur didn't look at the drawing. He turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes, usually dull and vacant, were wide, rimmed with red. He looked terrified. He raised a shaking, soot-stained finger and pointed. He wasn't pointing at the drawing. He was pointing up, towards the ceiling corner behind me. I laughed nervously. "What is it? Is there a spider?" I turned around and looked up at the corner of the room. There was nothing there, just the white acoustic tiles and the metal grate of the HVAC vent. I turned back to Arthur. "There's nothing there, Arthur." He shook his head violently. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong, painful. He dragged me back to the drawing. He tapped the paper, right in the corner where the perspective point would be. Then he picked up a piece of red pastel. He started drawing on the picture of me. He drew a red line across the neck of the me in the drawing. Then he drew a figure. He drew a dark, shadowy shape clinging to the ceiling in the corner of the room. In the drawing, this shape was dropping down behind the desk where I had been sitting. It looked like a man, but twisted, limbs splayed out like a spider, wearing dark clothing. In the drawing, the man was holding a knife. "Arthur," I said, pulling my hand away. "This is violent imagery. We talked about this. Is this how you're feeling? Do you feel like you want to hurt me?" I went into therapist mode. I thought it was a projection of his anger. Arthur let out a sound I had never heard him make, a whimper. He grabbed the charcoal again and wrote a single word at the bottom of the paper. "Look." Then he pointed up again, at the vent. A cold realization washed over me. Arthur wasn't hallucinating. Arthur was a hyperrealist. He drew exactly what he saw. He wasn't drawing a metaphor. He was drawing a reflection. I looked at the floor-to-ceiling window. It was pitch black outside, turning the glass into a mirror. From where Arthur was standing, he could see the reflection of the entire room. He could see the ceiling corner behind me. I looked at the reflection in the glass. At first I saw only the room, but then I saw it. The ventilation grate in the ceiling corner, the one directly above my desk, was gone. It had been removed, and squeezing out of the dark, square hole in the ceiling was a pair of legs. Someone was crawling out of the ceiling. I didn't breathe. I grabbed Arthur's arm. "Run," I whispered. At that exact moment, the lights went out. Total, absolute darkness. The storm must have knocked the power grid. I heard a heavy thud sound, the sound of a body dropping from the ceiling onto my desk. "Go," I screamed, pushing Arthur toward the door. We scrambled through the dark. I knew the layout of the room by heart, but panic makes you clumsy. I slammed my hip into a table, knocking over jars of water and paintbrushes. Behind us, I heard a wet, guttural growl. It didn't sound human. It sounded like an animal that had been cornered. And then, the sound of heavy boots stomping on the linoleum, charging at us. I found the door handle. I threw it open, and the emergency lights in the hallway flickered on, a dim, sickly yellow glow. I shoved Arthur into the hall and followed him, slamming the heavy door shut and throwing the deadbolt. From the other side, something slammed into the door with incredible force. The wood cracked. Bam! Bam! "Security," I screamed, my voice echoing down the empty corridor. "Help Sector 4. I grabbed Arthur and we ran toward the nurse's station. I didn't look back, but I could hear the door to the art room being kicked. The glass panel in the door shattered. Security arrived 2 minutes later, 3 large orderlies and the night guard. When they got to the art room, the door was open. The room was empty. The window was shattered. Someone had thrown a heavy clay sculpture through the glass and jumped out into the storm. The police arrived and conducted a sweep. They found the vent cover removed. They climbed up into the ceiling space. St. Jude S was built in the 70s. Between the drop ceiling and the real roof, there was a crawl space about 3 feet high, filled with pipes and wiring. It ran across the entire building. They found a mattress up there, positioned right over the art room. They found food wrappers, bottles of urine, and a collection of knives stolen from the cafeteria kitchen. But the worst thing they found was a peephole. A small hole drilled through the acoustic tile, looking directly down at my desk. The man had been living up there for weeks, maybe months, watching me. They never caught him. The rain washed away any tracks he might have left in the garden. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't walk back into that building. I couldn't look at a ceiling vent without feeling like I was going to throw up. I still have Arthur's drawing. I kept it, not as a souvenir but as a reminder. In the drawing, the figure dropping from the ceiling has a face. Arthur, with his photographic memory, had drawn the intruder's face in perfect detail in the few seconds he saw the reflection. It was a face I recognized. He was the janitor, the quiet, older man who always mopped the floors in the hallway while I worked, the one who always smiled at me and told me to have a blessed night. He wasn't an employee. Police later found out he had stolen the uniform from a locker room 3 months prior. He wasn't on the payroll. He didn't exist. He was just a ghost who had found a warm place to hide and a pretty girl to watch. Arthur saved my life that night. He saw the devil in the reflection, and he tried to tell me the only way he knew how. Now I live in a top-floor apartment. No attic, no drop ceilings, and I keep the curtains drawn at night, because sometimes when I'm sitting alone in the quiet, I get the urge to draw, and I'm terrified of what I might see if I look too closely at the paper. There is a specific kind of silence that only exists in a psychiatric ward at 3:00 a.m. It's not peaceful. It's heavy. It's the sound of 100 people sedated into a dreamless sleep, while the building itself seems to groan under the weight of their collective trauma. I was a registered nurse at Oak Creek Sanitarium for 5 years. I worked the graveyard shift, 11:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m. I liked it because it was quiet. The doctors were gone, the administration was asleep, and it was just me, a security guard named Miller, and the meds. My routine was religion. Check the charts, prep the little paper cups, push the cart, squeak, squeak, squeak. That cart was the only loud thing in the hallway. We had a patient in the geriatric wing named Elias. Elias was 72, diagnosed with advanced dementia and paranoid schizophrenia. He was harmless. Most of the time, he thought he was waiting for a bus to take him to a job he hadn't held in 30 years. The geriatric wing had a day room, a common area with a TV inside a plexiglass box, a few heavy tables bolted to the floor, and on the back wall, an old payphone. The payphone was a relic. It was one of those beige, metal-cased bricks from the 80s. It hadn't worked since I started working there. The coin slot was jammed with gum, and the cord had been cut short years ago to prevent patients from using it as a ligature. It was just a decoration on the wall, something the maintenance crew never got around to unscrewing. It was a Tuesday night. I was pushing the cart past the day room when I saw him. Elias was standing at the payphone. He was facing the wall, his forehead pressed against the beige metal. He was holding the receiver to his ear, the receiver that wasn't connected to anything. The cord dangled, a frayed tail of colored wires ending in empty air about 6 inches down. I stopped the cart. "Elias," I whispered, "it's late, sweetie, you need to be in bed." He didn't move. He just kept nodding like he was listening intently to a conversation. "Uh-huh," he mumbled. His voice was clear, lucid. Usually, Elias spoke in word salad, random noises and syllables. Tonight, he sounded sharp. "Yes, he's standing right behind me. He's wearing blue scrubs. He has the little cups." I froze. The hair on my arm stood up. I was wearing blue scrubs. I was holding the little cups. I laughed it off nervously. He must have heard me coming. "Elias, who are you talking to?" He turned slowly. His eyes, usually cloudy with cataracts and confusion, looked focused. He held a finger to his lips. "SHH, it's for you." He held the receiver out to me. I sighed. You learn to play along in this job. Denial just agitates them. I set the med cup down and walked into the day room. The air was freezing. The heating system in the old building was garbage, but this felt different. It was a cold spot, concentrated right around him. "Elias, the phone is broken," I said gently, reaching for the receiver. "He knows," Elias whispered. "He says the lines are down, but the connection is still open." I took the heavy handset from him. It was cold. I held it to my ear, fully expecting to hear nothing but the ambient silence of the room. I was ready to say, "Hello." Oh, they hung up and guide Elias back to bed. I put the phone to my ear. There was no silence. There was static. Not the digital hiss of a cell phone, but the deep, rolling crackle of an analog line. And beneath the static, there was a sound. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded like a heartbeat, slow, wet. "Hello?" I asked, feeling foolish. The static spiked, screeching in my ear, and then a voice cut through. It wasn't a human voice. It sounded synthesized, chopped up, like someone had spliced together recordings of different people speaking. "Did you count the pills?" I dropped the phone. It swung by its short, severed cord, banging against the metal casing. Clang, clang. I stared at the cut wire. I could see the copper strand sticking out the end. It wasn't plugged into the wall. It wasn't plugged into anything. "What did you hear?" Elias asked. He was smiling, a childish, innocent smile. "Nothing," I snapped. My heart was hammering. "Go to bed, Elias, now." I escorted him back to his room, locked him in, and went back to the nurse's station. I sat there for an hour, staring at the monitors. I checked the med cart. I recounted the pills. I had missed one. A single sedative was missing from the tray. I must have dropped it. I told myself I was tired. I was hallucinating. The brain fills in gaps when it expects to hear something. Pareidolia, that's all it was. The next night, I avoided the day room. I took the long way around to distribute meds. But on Thursday, I couldn't avoid it. I was doing a vitals check on a patient in room 404, which is right next to the day room. As I left room 404, I heard it. Ring. It was a dull, mechanical trill. Ring. I stopped in the hallway. The hallway was empty. The lights were dimmed to the low-wattage night setting. Ring. It was coming from the payphone. I walked toward the day room. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through water. I stood in the doorway. The room was empty. Elias was in his bed. I had just checked on him. The phone hung on the wall, silent. "I'm losing it," I whispered to myself. "Too much coffee, not enough sleep." I turned to leave. "Pick it up," a voice said. I spun around. Elias was sitting in one of the chairs in the corner of the dark room. I hadn't seen him. He was blending perfectly into the shadows. "Elias," I hissed, "you scared me to death." "It's ringing," he said. "Don't you hear it?" The phone was silent. "It's not ringing, Elias." "It is," he insisted. "He wants to tell you about the basement." My stomach turned over. The basement was the morgue. Or it used to be. It was used for storage now, mostly old files and broken wheelchairs. "Why would he want to talk about the basement?" I asked, my voice trembling. Elias looked at me, and his face, it went slack. His jaw dropped open a little too far. When he spoke, it wasn't his voice. It was that spliced, static-filled voice I had heard on the receiver. "Because that's where you left it." I backed away. "Left what?" Elias smiled. "The pill." I turned and ran to the nurse's station. I grabbed the phone, the real landline phone on the desk, and dialed security. "Miller," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you in the geriatric wing. Elias is out of bed and he's acting aggressive." "Copy that," Miller said. "On my way." I watched the monitor. I saw Miller walk down the hall. I saw him enter the day room. I saw him talking to someone in the corner. Then I saw him guide Elias back to his room. Miller came to the desk a few minutes later. He's fine, Miller said, pouring himself a coffee. Just confused. He was sitting in the dark talking to that old payphone again. Did he say anything to you? I asked. Miller chuckled. Yeah, weird stuff. He told me to tell you to check your pocket. I frowned. I put my hand in the pocket of my scrub top. My fingers brushed against something small and chalky. I pulled it out. It was a pill, a small white circular sedative. It was the pill I had lost 2 nights ago. I stared at it. I had washed these scrubs. I had changed twice since Tuesday. This was a fresh pair I had put on tonight. There was no way that pill could be in this pocket. Miller, I said, did you put this in my pocket? He looked at me like I was crazy. What? No, why would I do that? Elias? Elias said he knew where the pill was. He said it was in the basement. Miller paused. The smile faded from his face. The basement, that's weird. Why? Because, Miller said slowly, I just did a perimeter check downstairs. The door to the old morgue storage was open. I locked it, but I found this on the floor inside. Miller reached into his pocket and pulled out a handset. It was the beige receiver from the payphone in the day room. The cord was ragged, torn. Someone ripped it off the wall, Miller said. Must have been one of the patients earlier today. I was going to bring it to maintenance. I looked at the receiver in Miller's hand. Then I looked at the monitor showing the day room. The payphone on the wall, it was missing the handset. It was just the base unit. But I had held that handset 2 nights ago. I had seen Elias holding it tonight. Miller, I said, pointing at the screen. When did you find that? About 20 minutes ago, before you called me. Then what was Elias holding when I went in there? Miller looked at the screen. I don't know. He wasn't holding anything when I got there. He was just making hand gestures, pretending. I didn't finish my shift. I said I was sick. I left. But here is the kicker. Here is why I never went back to nursing. I got in my car. I drove home. It was 4:30 a.m. The roads were empty. I was shaking, crying, trying to rationalize everything. My cell phone rang. It was connected to the car's Bluetooth. The display on the dashboard lit up. Unknown caller. I didn't want to answer, but it kept ringing. Ring, ring. I pressed the button on the steering wheel. Hello. Static, deep, rolling analog static. And then that voice. You forgot to say goodbye. I swerved. I almost hit the guardrail. I hung up. I turned the phone off. I threw it in the backseat. When I got home, I ran inside and locked the door. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, waiting for the sun to come up. At 6:00 a.m., my landline, my home phone that I keep for emergencies, started to ring. I didn't answer it. I pulled the cord out of the wall. But the ringing didn't stop. It kept ringing and ringing and ringing. I grabbed the phone base. I smashed it against the floor until the plastic shattered and the bells flew out. Silence finally. I stood there, breathing heavy, looking at the broken pieces of my phone scattered on the carpet. And then from the pile of plastic debris from the broken speaker of the smashed handset, I heard a whisper, clear as day. We are still connected. I moved out of that house a week later. I don't own a landline anymore. I keep my cell phone on silent. But sometimes when I'm in a quiet room or when the reception is bad, I can hear it, behind the voices of my friends or my family. I can hear the static, and I can hear that wet, slow heartbeat, thump thump. The line is never truly dead. Group therapy is a strange beast. As a clinical psychologist, you are trained to believe that sharing trauma is the first step to healing it. You sit in a circle of uncomfortable plastic chairs, under buzzing fluorescent lights, and you ask broken people to pour their nightmares out onto the linoleum floor. The theory is that once the darkness is out in the open, the light can kill it. But at the Whispering Pines State Facility, I learned that some things don't die when you drag them into the light. Some things just get hungry. I was running the Tuesday afternoon session for Ward B. Ward B was medium risk. These weren't the violent offenders, but they weren't the temporary stays either. These were the lifers, the ones whose minds had cracked in ways that glue and therapy couldn't quite fix. We had a new admission that week. His name was Julian. Julian didn't look like he belonged in a mental health facility. He looked like an accountant or a librarian. He was small, pale, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses that were always slightly crooked. He sat in the circle with his hands folded neatly in his lap, staring at his knees. He was perfectly polite, perfectly still, and utterly terrifying. I couldn't explain why he scared me. It was an instinctual reaction, like a dog hackles raising when it senses a predator. But on paper, he was benign. Diagnosis: severe insomnia and dissociative episodes. We started the session with the usual check-ins. Marcus talked about his mother. Sarah talked about the spiders she saw in her peripheral vision. It was routine, boring almost. "Julian," I said, trying to include him, "would you like to share anything with the group? It's your first time, so you can just listen if you prefer." Julian looked up. His eyes were a pale, watery blue, bordering on gray. "I don't mind sharing, Dr. Vance, but I don't have much to say about myself." "That's okay," I encouraged. "What's on your mind?" He turned his head slowly and looked at Marcus. Marcus was a big guy, an ex-biker who had fried his brain on synthetics. He was usually the intimidator in the room. "I'm worried about Marcus," Julian said softly. Marcus bristled. "Man, don't worry about me. I don't even know you." Julian didn't blink. "I'm worried about the hallway, Marcus. The long one with the red carpet, and the door at the end that doesn't have a handle." The room went dead silent. Marcus's face drained of color. He went from angry to ashen in a second. He gripped the arms of his plastic chair so hard the plastic creaked. "How do you know about that?" Marcus whispered. "I saw it last night," Julian said. "You were walking down it. The walls were breathing. And when you got to the door, you tried to scream, but your mouth was sewn shut with copper wire." Marcus stood up, knocking his chair over. "Who told you? Did you read my file? Who told you about the wire?" "Nobody told me," Julian said, his voice flat, emotionless. "I was there. I was watching from the ceiling." I stood up, stepping between them. "Okay, let's take a breath. Marcus, sit down. Julian, we don't talk about other patients' experiences unless they share them first." "I didn't mean to upset him," Julian said. "I just wanted him to know that I saw what was behind the door. He didn't open it, but I did." Marcus was hyperventilating. "He's in my head, Doc. He's in my head." I ended the session early. I checked Marcus's file later that evening. In his private journals, which were confidential and kept in a locked safe, he had written extensively about a recurring nightmare involving a red hallway and a mouth sewn shut with wire. There was no way Julian could have known that. No way. I rationalized it. Maybe Marcus had muttered about it in the cafeteria. Maybe Julian was just a good guesser, cold reading like those fake psychics. But the next week, things got worse. The atmosphere in Ward B had shifted. The patients were exhausted. They looked like they hadn't slept in days. Dark circles under their eyes, tremors in their hands. We gathered for the Tuesday session. Julian sat in the same spot, hands folded, looking like a statue. "Does anyone want to start?" I asked. Sarah raised her hand. She was trembling. I don't want to sleep anymore, Dr. Vance." "Why is that, Sarah?" She glanced nervously at Julian. "Because he's there." I frowned. "Who is there?" "Him," she pointed at Julian. "In my dream last night, I was in the glass box again, the one filling with water, and he was standing outside the glass, just watching me drown. He was taking notes." I looked at Julian. He was smiling, a tiny, polite, tight-lipped smile. "I wasn't taking notes, Sarah," Julian corrected her gently. "I was drawing a diagram of how long it takes for the lungs to fill." Sarah screamed. It was a raw, primal sound. She lunged across the circle, clawing at Julian's face. Orderlies rushed in. We had to sedate Sarah. We had to restrain Marcus, who started banging his head against the wall. The session dissolved into chaos. Through it all, Julian sat there, unmoved, unscathed. He just cleaned his glasses on his shirt tail. I pulled Julian into my office immediately after. I was furious, and frankly, I was scared. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "How are you doing this? Are you threatening them?" "No, doctor," he said calmly. I'm just observing. I have insomnia, remember. I can't sleep, so when everyone else sleeps, I wander." "You wander the ward?" "No," he tapped his temple. "I wander here, the frequencies. Minds are like radios, Dr. Vance. Most people stay on their own channel, but my dial is broken, it spins, and sometimes it picks up other stations." "You're claiming you can enter their dreams," I scoffed. "That's impossible." "Is it?" He leaned forward. "Then how do I know about the little girl, doctor?" I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "The little girl," he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The one in the yellow raincoat, standing at the bottom of the swimming pool." The room spun. I hadn't thought about that in 20 years. When I was 7, my cousin drowned in a pool. She was wearing a yellow raincoat because she had fallen in while playing near the edge during a storm. It was the trauma that made me become a psychologist. I had never told a soul at this facility. It wasn't in my file. It wasn't on the internet. It was locked in the deepest, darkest vault of my memory. "She looks very lonely down there," Julian whispered. "The water is so murky, green with algae, and she's waving at you. She wants you to jump in." "Stop it," I gasped. I felt bile rising in my throat. "She says you pushed her." "I didn't," I shouted, slamming my hand on the desk. "I tried to save her." "That's not what the dream says," Julian said. "In the dream, your hand is on her back. In the dream, you're smiling." "Get out," I whispered. "Get out of my office." He stood up smoothly. "I can't control where I go, doctor. I go where the fear is strongest. And you have so much fear, it's like a beacon, a lighthouse in the dark." He walked out. That night I went home, but I didn't sleep. I drank 3 cups of coffee and sat up watching TV. I was terrified of closing my eyes. But biology always wins. Around 4:00 a.m., I dozed off on the couch. I was standing at the edge of the pool. The concrete was cracked and slimy. The sky was a bruised purple, and there at the bottom of the deep end was the yellow patch of color. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. Then the water began to ripple, not from the wind, from something entering the pool. I looked across the water. Julian was standing on the diving board. He was wearing his hospital gown. He waved at me. Then he pointed down. I looked back at the bottom of the pool. The girl in the yellow raincoat turned over, but it wasn't my cousin. It was me, a drowned, bloated version of me, wearing that yellow coat. And then the drowned version of me opened its mouth and screamed. But instead of bubbles, black sludge poured out, filling the pool, rising faster and faster, turning the water into tar. I woke up screaming, thrashing on my living room floor. I called in sick the next day, and the day after. When I finally went back to work 3 days later, I went straight to the administration. I was going to demand Julian be transferred. I was going to recommend high-security isolation. I was going to tell them he was a danger to the staff. I walked into the main office. The clinical director, Dr. Arnott, looked up. Dr. Vance, good. I was about to call you." "We need to talk about the new patient," I said breathlessly. "Julian, there's something wrong with him. He's destabilizing the entire ward." Dr. Arnott looked confused. He adjusted his glasses. "Julian? Who is Julian?" "The new admission. Room 4B, the one with the insomnia." Dr. Arnott frowned. He turned his computer monitor so I could see it. He pulled up the census for Ward B. "Dr. Vance, Room 4B has been empty for 2 weeks. We haven't had a new admission named Julian." My blood ran cold. "No, that's impossible. I ran a group session with him. I interviewed him. Marcus and Sarah, they saw him too. Sarah attacked him." Dr. Arnott looked concerned. "Sarah had a psychotic break on Tuesday, yes. She was screaming at an empty chair. She clawed at the air until she fell over. We assumed it was a hallucination." "And Marcus?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Marcus had a stroke that same night," Arnott said gently. "He's in the ICU. He hasn't woken up." I stumbled back, but I spoke to him in my office. "We checked the security cameras, Dr. Vance," Arnott said, his voice taking on that soothing tone we use for patients. "You were in your office alone. You were talking to the wall for 20 minutes. I felt the floor tilt. I was losing it. Maybe I was the one who belonged in a cell. I want to leave. I needed air. I needed to get out of that building. As I walked down the hallway, clutching my keys, passing the empty common room of Ward B, I stopped. On the whiteboard where we list the daily activities, someone had erased the schedule. In the center of the board, written in perfect, small, neat handwriting, the kind an accountant might have, was a message. "See you tonight, doctor." And below it a drawing, a crude charcoal sketch of a yellow raincoat. I ran to my car and I drove until the gas light came on. That was 6 months ago. I don't practice psychology anymore. I work in a library now. It's quiet. But I don't sleep, not really. I take cat naps during the day, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, because I know that if I fall into a deep sleep, if I go into REM, he'll be there. He's not a patient, he's not a ghost. I think he's a traveler, and he's hitched a ride with me. Sometimes when I'm shelving books in the quiet back rows of the library, I hear it. A polite, soft clearing of the throat. I don't turn around, I know who it is. He's waiting for me to close my eyes. Most people think of horror as something you see, a shadow in the hallway, a face in the window, but I'm here to tell you that hearing it is worse. Because when you see something, your brain can try to explain it away, a trick of the light, a reflection. But sound is intimate. It crawls right inside your head and sits there. I work as a medical transcriptionist, or I used to. I was a freelancer, mostly handling overflow work for legal firms and private hospitals. I'd get a secure link, download a batch of audio files, mostly doctors mumbling into dictaphones or recorded therapy sessions, and I'd type them out. 6 months ago, I picked up a contract for the archives of the Hawthorne State Asylum. The place had been shut down in the 90s due to budget cuts, which is usually code for too many lawsuits, and a private firm was digitizing their old reel-to-reel and cassette tapes. It was boring work. Hours of static, coughing, and mundane discussions about medication dosages, until I got to box 19. The file was labeled Sub-099, Solitary Confinement, Observation LOGS, NOV 1994. There were 7 audio files, no doctor's intro, no date stamp spoken, just the audio from a microphone that had been mounted inside a solitary confinement cell. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, brewed a tea, and hit play on the first file. File 1. There was silence for the first 30 seconds, just the low hum of the ventilation. Then, a voice. It was a man, young, maybe 20s. He sounded terrified but lucid. "Hello, is the mic on? Look, Dr. Salinger, I know you're listening. You can't keep me in here, it's too tight. My skin feels tight." I typed it out, standard claustrophobia. "The air in here," the voice continued. "It tastes like copper, like old pennies. And why is it so hot? I'm sweating, but the sweat is thick. It's like oil." I paused the track, thick sweat, weird detail. I kept typing. File 2. This file must have been recorded days later. The voice was different, raspy, deeper. "It's itching. God, it's itching everywhere. Under the arms, behind the knees. It feels like the clothes are fused to me." Then the sound of fabric tearing. "Re-yip. Get it off," he screamed. "Get it off me." Then a sound I will never forget. It sounded like someone peeling a sticker off a piece of glass, but wet. Schlack, schlack. "Oh God," the man whispered. "The skin. It's coming off with the shirt. It's pink underneath." "No, not pink, it's gray." "Why is it gray?" I stopped typing. My own skin started to crawl. I checked the metadata on the file. There were no notes from the doctors, no intervention. They were just letting this happen. File 3. The audio quality was worse here, like the microphone was clogged or covered in something. The man wasn't speaking anymore. He was making noises, wet, guttural clicking sounds. Click, click, hiss. Then a whisper, but it sounded wrong. It sounded like his tongue was too big for his mouth. "The bones are shifting, the shape is better." Then a loud snap, like a dry branch breaking. Then a scream that dissolved into a gurgling laugh. The knee went backward much faster now. I felt sick. I took off my headphones. It sounded like body horror fiction, a radio play, but the ambient noise, the hum of the asylum vent, the distant clank of pipes, was consistent with the other real files I had done. This was real. I debated deleting the files. I didn't want to hear the rest, but curiosity is a disease. I loaded file 4. File 4. There was no human speech in this one, just movement, fast movement. Slap, 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 slap. It sounded like wet meat hitting the concrete floor. The pacing was frantic. He or it was running circles in the small cell, and the rhythm was wrong. It wasn't thump thump 2 feet. It was thump thump click drag. 4 limbs, maybe more. Then the creature stopped near the microphone. I could hear its breathing. It wasn't inhaling and exhaling. It was a rapid fluttering sound like a moth trapped in a jar. Then a voice, not the man's voice. A voice that sounded like 2 pieces of sandpaper rubbing together. Do not open the door. I froze. Was he talking to the doctors? We need to finish cooking. Cooking? The word sent a shiver down my spine. He viewed the cell as a cocoon. File 5. This was the longest file, 4 hours of audio. I scrubbed through the waveform looking for spikes in volume. I found one near the end. I clicked the timestamp. The sound was deafening. It was the sound of metal screeching. The heavy steel door of the solitary cell was being hit. Bong, bong, bong. But the impact was coming from the inside. Let us out, the voice shrieked. It was high-pitched now, vibrating with a frequency that made my teeth hurt. The shell is dry, the shell is dry. I heard the distinct sound of the metal warping, the groan of bolts being stripped from concrete. Then shouting from the outside, the guards. Back up, get the tranquilizers. Jesus Christ, what is that thing? Shoot it, it's on the ceiling, shoot it. Gunshots pop, pop, pop. Then a wet thud, and screaming, human screaming, the guards. The audio became a chaotic mess of tearing fabric, wet crunches, and the panicked yells of men dying. It has no eyes, how does it see? My leg, it took my leg. Then silence. I sat in my home office trembling. The file ended. I looked at the last file, file 6. If everyone was dead, who recorded file 6? I clicked play. Silence. Then heavy breathing, but not from the creature. This was human breathing. Frantic, hiding. This is Dr. Salinger, a whisper came through. I'm in the observation booth. It broke the glass, it's in the vents. Subject 99 has metamorphosed, it's not human. It absorbed the biomass of the guards, it grew. God, it's so big now. A pause. If anyone finds these tapes, burn them. Do not listen to the frequency, it mimics, it learns, it's a hunter. It uses the voice to. The audio cut out. I sat back, rubbing my temples. My heart was racing, that was it. A tragic, horrific event from 1994. The creature must have been killed, the asylum shut down to cover it up. It made sense. I went to type up the final report. Files indicate a hostile organism and loss of life. As I was typing, I noticed something on my screen. The file name for file 6. I had misread it earlier. I thought it said NOV 1994 like the others. I looked closer at the digital tag. Date modified, NOV 23, 2025. My blood turned to ice. Today, that file wasn't from the archive. I looked at the source link. It wasn't a download, it was a stream. I was listening to a live feed. I scrambled to close the window, to shut down the computer. But before I could, my speakers crackled. A new sound came through, not from the file I had clicked, but from the stream that was still open. It was a sound I recognized. Click, click, hiss. And then a voice, that sandpaper voice. We hears you typing. I stopped breathing. The sound wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was coming from the vent above my head. I looked up. The vent cover in my ceiling was slowly, quietly being unscrewed from the inside. A screw fell onto my desk. Ping. And then through the slats of the vent, I saw something gray, something wet. And it spoke to me, not through the computer but directly into the room. The shell is dry. I didn't run. I couldn't. I just sat there and watched as the gray, fluid-like fingers pushed the vent cover aside and dropped into my office. I'm dictating this on my phone now. I'm locked in the bathroom, but the door is wood, and I can hear it outside. It's not trying to break in. It's mimicking me. It's standing outside the door and it's using my voice. It's saying, "Open the door." It's just a recording. It's just a story. But I know it's not. If you are reading this script, stop reading, stop listening. Because now you know about it, and it knows you're listening. Do you hear that? That clicking sound in your walls? It's not the house settling. People think working at a mental asylum is all about straitjackets and padded cells. They forget about the grounds. These places are usually built on massive plots of land, isolated from the city. Someone has to cut the grass. Someone has to trim the hedges. That was me. I was the head groundskeeper at the Greenbrier Institute for 3 years. It was a nice job, honestly. Quiet. The patients were mostly kept indoors, and the ones allowed outside were the harmless geriatric cases. They'd shuffle around the courtyard, staring at the flowers, lost in their own worlds. But there was one part of the grounds that I hated, the East Courtyard. It was a small, walled-off garden that was supposedly for sensory therapy. It was overgrown with these massive, ancient weeping willow trees. I've been a landscaper for 20 years, and I've never seen trees like these. Their bark was pale, almost gray and smooth to the touch, and they were always weeping. Not just the drooping branches, I mean the trees literally dripped. A thick, sticky sap that smelled like copper and spoiled honey. We had a patient named Mrs. Elroy. She was 80 years old, tiny, frail, with advanced Alzheimer's. She spent every waking moment in the East Courtyard. She wouldn't sit on the benches. She would stand directly in front of the largest willow tree, a massive thing with a trunk 5 feet wide, and she would talk to it. She would stroke the bark, kiss it, and whisper for hours. One afternoon, I was weeding the flower beds nearby. Mrs. Elroy was doing her usual routine. "Eat your soup, darling," she whispered to the tree. "It's cold out today, put your coat on." I stood up and stretched my back. "Afternoon, Mrs. Elroy," I said, talking to the tree again. She turned and looked at me with eyes that were surprisingly sharp. "It's not a tree, young man. It's my husband, it's Arthur." I nodded politely. "Right, Arthur. Well, Arthur looks like he's growing well." "He's hungry," she said suddenly. Her voice dropped an octave. "He says the soil is dry, he needs more." "I watered it this morning, ma'am." She shook her head violently. "Not water, he doesn't want water." I let it go. You don't argue with them. The trouble started about a week later. The plumbing in the East Wing backed up. The toilets were overflowing. The sinks weren't draining. The maintenance guys traced the blockage to the main sewer line that ran right under the East Courtyard. The administrator told me I had to dig it up. "It's probably roots," he said. "Those damn willows are getting into the pipes. Go out there, dig a trench, and cut the roots back." I wasn't happy about it. Digging up sewer lines is nasty work, and I'd have to do it at night so I didn't disturb the patients during their recreation time. So at 10:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, I was out there with a backhoe and a shovel, under the floodlights. The asylum loomed over me, dark and silent, except for the occasional flicker of a TV in a patient's room. I started digging near the big willow, Arthur, as Mrs. Elroy called it. The soil was weird. Usually dirt is just dirt, but this soil was warm. It was steaming in the cool night air, and it was soft, spongy. As I dug deeper, the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of sewage. It smelled like a butcher shop that had lost power for a week. Sweet, rotting meat. I hit the pipe about 4 feet down. Sure enough, it was cracked. A massive root, thick as my thigh, had wrapped around the ceramic pipe and crushed it. I grabbed my chainsaw. I needed to cut the root to clear the pipe. I revved the saw and lowered it into the trench. The teeth bit into the wood. Screech. It didn't sound like wood cutting. It sounded like a pig being slaughtered. A high-pitched, wet squeal. And then the spray. I expected sawdust. Instead, a geyser of thick, dark red fluid sprayed out of the cut. It hit me in the face. It was warm. It tasted salty. I dropped the saw, wiping the muck from my eyes. "What the hell?" I muttered. I shined my flashlight into the hole. The root wasn't wood. I mean, on the outside it had bark, but where I had cut it, inside it was meat, muscle fibers, white tendons. And in the center, where the tree rings should be, there was a jagged white thing that looked suspiciously like a femur bone. I stood there paralyzed, looking at this bleeding tree root. Then I heard the window slide open above me. "You hurt him." It was Mrs. Elroy. She was leaning out of her third-story window, her white hair wild in the wind. "You cut him, you murderer." "Mrs. Elroy, get back inside," I yelled. "It's just a tree root." "It's his leg," she shrieked. "You cut off his leg." Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet shifted. It wasn't an earthquake, it was localized. The dirt in the trench began to churn. The other roots, the smaller, hair-like feeder roots, started to move. They writhed like snakes coiling around my boots. I tried to step out of the trench, but they were fast. They tightened around my ankles, pulling me down. I scrambled, clawing at the muddy walls of the pit. "Help!" I screamed. "Security!" The big root, the bleeding one, twitched. It bent toward me, the open wound gushing that red sap. I kicked frantically, losing a boot in the process. I managed to haul myself up onto the grass, panting, covered in mud and red slime. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it back into the hole. What I saw will haunt me until the day I die. The soil at the bottom of the trench had washed away from the severed pipe. And sitting there, encased in the root ball of the willow tree, was a skull. But it wasn't just a skull buried in the dirt. The roots were growing asterisk out of it. The wood had fused with the bone. The roots were weaving through the eye sockets, through the jaw. And as I watched, the jaw of the skull moved. It opened and closed, driven by the shifting roots. A sound came out of the hole, a low, gurgling moan. "Hungry." It wasn't the wind, it was the tree. I ran, I left the backhoe. I left my chainsaw. I ran straight to the maintenance shed, got in my truck, and drove through the front gate without stopping. I called the police from a gas station 10 miles away. I told them I found a body buried in the garden. The police investigated. I was brought in for questioning. They found the skull. They found ribs. They found a pelvis. But here's the official story the asylum put out. They claimed it was an old potter's field, an unmarked grave from the 1920s that the tree had naturally grown into. They said the red sap was a result of iron-rich soil and a fungal infection in the wood. They said the moving roots were a hallucination caused by stress and the flickering floodlights. Case closed. But I know the truth. I looked up the records. Mrs. Elroy's husband, Arthur, didn't die at home. He was a patient at Greenbrier 10 years ago. He went missing. They said he wandered off into the woods and was never found. And it wasn't just Arthur. Over the last 50 years, 12 patients have gone missing from Greenbrier. All of them wandered off. And every time a patient went missing, a new tree was planted in the east courtyard. The asylum isn't losing patients. It's recycling them. It's feeding them to the garden. Those trees, they aren't just plants. They are biological cages. They absorb the body, they absorb the mind, and they keep them alive in a slow, vegetative hell. I moved to Arizona. I live in the desert now. No trees, just cactus and sand. But sometimes I look at my hand, the hand that got sprayed by the sap. The skin there is a little rougher than the rest, a little grayer. And sometimes when I'm in the shower and the water hits it, I feel a strange sensation. Not on my skin, but under asterisk it. Like something is drinking the water. And yesterday I tried to trim a hangnail on my thumb, but when I cut it, it didn't bleed red. It bled a thick amber sap. I think I'm taking root. I am a fire safety inspector. It's not a glamorous job, but it appeals to my brain. I like rules. I like geometry. I like knowing that if a building catches fire, there is a mathematical certainty that people can get out. My job is to measure distances. How far is room A from the nearest exit? Is the hallway wide enough for a gurney? Do the doors swing outward or inward? I see the world in blueprints. Last month, I was called to assess the Westlake Behavioral Center. It's a massive brutalist structure from the 60s, all raw concrete and small windows. The state was planning to reopen a decommissioned wing, Sector 7, and they needed me to sign off on the fire codes. I arrived at 9:00 a.m. with my laser measure, my clipboard, and a set of old blueprints provided by the county. Sector 7 was dusty, smelling of stagnant air and dead flies. I started my walkthrough. Room 701, measure, 12 feet by 14 feet, clear path to door, pass. Room 702, pass. It was boring, routine work, until I got to the end of the main corridor. According to the blueprints, the hallway should have ended at a T-junction. Left to the nurse's station, right to the linen closet. But when I stood there looking at the gray carpet, there was no T-junction. The hallway just kept going. It curved gently to the left. I checked the blueprints again. Maybe I had the wrong floor. No, 3rd floor, Sector 7. I assumed it was an undocumented renovation. It happens all the time. Contractors build things without updating the city files. So I decided to map it myself. I walked down the curved hallway, counting my steps. 1, 2, 3, 50 steps. I stopped. I did the math in my head. A standard stride is about 30 inches. 50 steps is roughly 125 feet. I looked out the window in room 702 earlier. The entire building was only 100 feet wide. I had just walked further than the length of the building. I should be hovering in midair outside the window, but I was still in a hallway. A cold sweat pricked at my hairline. I turned around to walk back. 1, 2, 3, 70 steps. It took longer to get back. My heart started thumping. This is impossible. Geometry doesn't work like this. I took out my laser measure. I aimed it at the wall at the end of the hall. The laser dot appeared. The device read 40.5 feet. I took a step forward. I measured again. 40.5 feet. I took 10 steps forward. 40.5 feet. The wall wasn't getting closer. I was moving, but the distance remained exactly the same. It was like a treadmill. Panic is a funny thing. In a fire, panic kills you. As an inspector, I'm trained to suppress it. I forced myself to stop, breathe, and look for an exit. That's when I saw the door. It was a heavy steel door, painted a jarring industrial red. Above it, a glowing sign, exit. This door was not on the blueprints. In fact, on the blueprints, this location was a solid load-bearing wall. But I didn't care. Exit means out. Exit means the parking lot, my car, and a stiff drink. I pushed the push bar. The door clicked and swung open. I expected a stairwell or the sunlight. Instead, I stepped into a room. It was a perfect cube. White floors, white ceiling, white walls. Bright, shadowless fluorescent light coming from everywhere and nowhere. And in the center of the room, there was a desk. Sitting at the desk was a man. He was wearing a fire safety inspector's uniform. He had my haircut. He had my face. He was writing on a clipboard. I stood in the doorway, my hand frozen on the latch. "Who are you?" I croaked. The man looked up. His eyes were tired. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "I'm the inspector," he said. His voice was my voice. "No," I said, backing away. "I'm the inspector. I'm inspecting Sector 7. "Sector 7 doesn't exist," the man said calmly. He tapped his clipboard. "Look at your map." I looked down at the blueprints in my hand. The paper was blank. I mean completely blank. No blue lines, no room numbers, just white paper. "What is this?" I whispered. "This is the egress," the man said. "You were looking for the way out, you found it." "I want to leave," I said. "I want to go to my car." The man laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Your car? You think there's a car? You think there's a parking lot? You think there's a world outside this building?" He stood up and walked around the desk. "There is nothing outside, friend. The asylum is all there is. We just hallucinate the rest to keep ourselves sane. We imagine the drive to work. We imagine our wives. We imagine the sky." "You're crazy," I shouted. I turned and ran back through the red door. I sprinted down the hallway. The geometry seemed to be breaking down. The floor tilted at 45 degrees. The doors to the patient rooms were flapping open and closed like mouths. I ran until I found the main stairwell. I threw the door open and took the stairs 3 at a time, down to the lobby. I burst into the main entrance hall. I could see the glass sliding doors. I could see the parking lot beyond them. I could see my Ford F-150 parked in the spot nearest the handicap ramp. "Oh, thank God," I sobbed. I ran to the glass doors. They slid open. I stepped out into the fresh air. But my foot didn't hit asphalt. My foot hit carpet. I stumbled and fell. I looked up. I wasn't outside. I was standing in a hallway, gray carpet, peeling paint. I stood up and spun around. Behind me was the door I had just walked through. It wasn't the glass sliding doors of the lobby. It was the red steel door marked exit. I was back in the hallway. I tried again. I opened the door I walked through. I was back in the hallway. I tried for hours. Every door in the building, the bathroom doors, the closet doors, the fire escapes, they all lead back to this same gray hallway. I'm sitting on the floor now. My laser measure ran out of batteries an hour ago. The last time I checked, the hallway was infinite. I can hear footsteps coming from the other end. Slow, methodical footsteps, and the scratching of a pen on a clipboard. He's coming, the other inspector, the one who knows the truth. I'm recording this on my phone. I'm going to upload it to the cloud if I can find a signal. If you are watching this video, do me a favor. Go to your front door. Right now, unlock it, open it. Look outside. Are you sure that's the sky? Are you sure those are trees? Or is it just a painting on the wall of your cell? Don't go out, stay inside. If you go out, you might find the edges, and once you see the edges, you can never unsee them. Wait, the footsteps stopped. He's standing right behind me, isn't he?